Hi everybody, this is 5 tips for getting good in the Elden Ring DLC, Shadows of the Erdtree. My first piece of advice is don't be afraid to explore. Right off the start, you're going to come across a couple of places where you can go into, and if you go into them, you are very likely going to get smashed if you're watching this video. Now, of course, you may be good at the game and watching the video of your own volition, but chances are you found this video from looking for help with the game, and that's okay. There are items scattered throughout the land called Erdtree fragments. They can be found in various different places, from sitting on top of a tombstone to beside bonfires, which is where you'll find a lot of them, and various places in between. The more of these you find, the stronger you get. While your soul level matters in terms of stats, this is going to scale up your attack and defense by a lot. So before you ever go into any dungeon, I recommend at least grabbing a few of these. They do go scale upwards as you play. At first, 1 upgrades your abilities, but eventually you'll need 2 and then 3 to continue forward. So be sure to pick them up when you can. There's also an ash item that powers up your summons. And again, don't be afraid to use summons in this game. You're probably not an expert. You're probably not the kind of person who can just one-shot a boss without any help. They're there for a reason. The game is difficult. While everything is doable soloable, the difference between doing it with your summons and doing it without is patience. You'll find yourself with far more openings against the boss, and battles will just take longer, while otherwise being mostly the same. As most bosses have area of effect attacks that can hit beside and behind them that deal as much, if not more damage as their regular frontal assault attacks. My second piece of advice involves the first boss you'll likely come across. You'll find it at the top of Bellerute Tower Settlement. This boss is extremely erratic and very hard to predict, but it is dodgeable. While its first form can be somewhat difficult, it's not too bad. The same can be said about its third ice form. However, its second form, the lightning form, is very much its most difficult. Therefore, I highly recommend equipping your strongest lightning resistance if you're having a lot of trouble with it. The Divine Beast Dancing Lion is as difficult to read as Mikaelith the Black Blade was. So if you had trouble with Mikaelith, you are likely going to have trouble with this guy. But again, lightning resistance, and just wait for him to attack your friends. You should have a summon as well as a ash bell, as well as much defensive stuff as you can. If you still find yourself having trouble, drink a lightning resistance flask. If somehow you're finding yourself having more difficulty with a different phase, such as the ice phase, prepare for that instead. Remember, ice is considered just straight magic. There is no ice defense. Speaking of difficult bosses, not long after that, you'll likely come across Willana, the Twin Moon Knight. Now, I know she feels like she has no breaks in her attacks, and it very much seems that way, but she actually does. First off, I highly recommend a video by Scott June, who talks a lot about defenses and how to buff yourself, including things like Boiled Crab and the Great Knight Talisman, or the Great Shield Talisman. Maybe it's called the Tower Shield Talisman, I forget. But yeah, definitely check that out. But beyond that, there's something that I haven't seen talked about a lot yet about Rennala, and that is that she is very tall. And the reason that is important is because she uses twin swords that do not have many, if any, vertical attacks. What this means is all of her attacks can be low profiled. The way to do this is simply use jumping attacks. As soon as she finishes the attack string, do a jumping attack. She'll typically recover and begin another attack string that will go right over your head. I literally took no damage from her for like 60% of the fight because she just couldn't hit me because she's so tall. So jumping attacks are your friend here. Advice 4, speaking of jumping attacks, hammers are your friend. They have an extremely high stagger rate, and against a lot of these bosses, like the dragons flying around and a lot of these knights that you'll find in the tomes and temples, that have very fast attack patterns and hit really hard, especially at the beginning of the DLC before you have a lot of upgrades, you can use jumping attacks to stagger them and get a critical hit in. This is compounded by the fact that you can find an accessory or a talisman in the first village you come across at the very top called the Dagger of Mercy. This increases your attack power by 20% for around 20 seconds after you land a critical hit. This is pretty much some of the highest damage that you can get in the game as for a single talisman slot. So if you're using hammers, you can also have a high crit rate weapon, stagger your opponent, pull out your dagger or whatever crit rate weapon you have, as long as it deals more damage than your hammer, get your critical attack in, deal a lot of damage, and now you have a 20% attack power boost, switch back to your hammer, and get back to work staggering. This is a very good strategy for a ton of bosses. And lastly, speaking of daggers, most of the bosses are susceptible to bleed. Very susceptible. So if everything else is failing you, pull out the bleed strategy and do your best to land your attacks, get your bleed procs, and you will deal gigantic chunks of damage to the boss. Creating your own build can be fun. Genuinely, I love doing it. But the DLC is actually fairly difficult. So you may have to, at least for now, adapt your strategy to something a bit more, let's call meta, in order to learn how to play the stuff. And then on your second playthrough, you can mess with builds and stuff. But right now, it's best to focus on exploring and seeing what's out there. But again, this advice is only for if your back's absolutely against the wall and you're thinking about quitting the game. I would really rather you play how you want. I've changed my builds 3 to 4 times just for funsies, and it's been a blast. I really hope that helped you. Let me know in the comments below if it did, and if you have any other issues, and I hope to put out some more of these in the future. I just really wanted to do it now. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, likes, comments, subscriptions, all that good stuff helps out a bunch. And I will see you in the next one. Deuces, dummies.